The 1978 Formula One season was the 29th season of FIA Formula One motor racing. It featured the 1978 World Championship of F1 drivers and the International Cup for F1 Constructors, contested concurrently over a 16-race series which commenced on January 15 and ended on October 8. The season also included the non-championship BRDC International Trophy. Mario Andretti won the Drivers' World Championship. He remains the last American driver to win the World Championship, and his victory at the Dutch Grand Prix is also the last for an American driver. Ronnie Peterson was awarded second place in the drivers' standings posthumously, having died from medical complications after an accident at Monza during the Italian Grand Prix. JPS-Lotus was awarded the International Cup for F1 Constructors. Championship defendants Niki Lauda and Ferrari had parted ways late in 1977 and both parties struggled to repeat the successes they had enjoyed the previous seasons. Carlos Reutemann finished third in the championship in the lead Ferrari, whilst Lauda finished fourth with Brabham. Apart from Peterson's death, the year saw another tragedy when Peterson's Swedish compatriot Gunnar Nilsson died from cancer, having been forced to cut his career short after the previous season because of the disease. Drivers and constructors. The following drivers and constructors contested the 1978 World Championship of F1 drivers and the International Cup for F1 Constructors. Season report. The 1978 World Championship of F1 drivers and the International Cup for F1 Constructors were contested concurrently over a 16-race series. Race 1, Argentina. The 1978 season started in Argentina, where Mario Andretti took pole in his Lotus, with Carlos Reutemann's Ferrari joining him on the front row and Ronnie Peterson in the other Lotus third on the grid. The start was uneventful, with Andretti and Reutemann easily keeping first and second, with John Watson in the Brabham taking third from Peterson. Watson took second from Reutemann on the 7th lap, but Andretti was uncatchable. Reutemann ran third for a while, but then began to drop down the order, and so reigning world champion Niki Lauda took third in his Brabham, which became second with 10 laps left when Watson's engine blew up. Andretti motored on to a crashing victory, with Lauda second and Patrick Di Paola's Tyrrell taking the final spot on the podium. Race 2, Brazil. Brazil was the country where the drivers travelled to for the second round of the season, and Formula One made its first visit to the new Jacaré-Paguá Autorome in Rio de Janeiro, after 6 years at the very bumpy and demanding Interlagos circuit in Sao Paulo. The Jacaré-Paguá circuit was one that was to be visited by Formula One for the rest of the next decade. The typically extreme weather during February in Rio meant that this race was run in oppressively hot and humid conditions. Peterson took pole with James Hunt driving for McLaren, beating Andretti to second. At the start, it was Reutemann who beat the trio into the first corner, with Hunt and Andretti following, as Peterson got a bad start. Hunt ran second until he had to pit for tyres. As a result, Andretti took the place until late in the race when he suffered gearbox issues. Reutemann was never headed at the front and went to win comfortably, with double world champion Emerson Fittipaldi and his brother's team finishing second, and Lauda third, with both overhauling and ailing Andretti towards the end. Race 3, South Africa. After a long break, the season resumed in South Africa, where defending champion Lauda took his first pole for Brabham with Andretti alongside and Hunt next. Andretti took the lead at the start, and set about building a gap, whereas Lauda dropped behind Jody Scheckter's Wolf. Young Italian Riccardo Patrese was on a charge in the Arrows, passing Lauda for third after 20 laps. As the race went on, both Andretti and Scheckter began to suffer from tyre issues and were passed by Patrese. Di Paola was up to second ahead of Lauda, but the latter's engine failed, handing third to Andretti. Patrese, however, seemed to have the race in his pocket until his engine failed, and Di Paola took the lead, but his Tyrrell began to trail smoke. Andretti was up to second, but he had to pit for fuel, and thus his teammate Peterson took the place before catching and passing Di Paola on the last lap to win after some wheel banging. Watson completed the podium. Race 4, United States West. The next race was in the famous Long Beach circuit in the U.S., and the Ferraris dominated qualifying, with Reutemann taking pole ahead of teammate Gilles Villeneuve, with defending champion Lauda and home hero Andretti on the second row. When the race started, Watson in fifth late braked all into turn 1, through he ran wide and Villeneuve took the lead, whereas Reutemann dropped down to fourth behind Lauda. The Ferraris, with the two Brabhams in between, ran together until Watson's engine failed. Alan Jones's Williams was up to fourth and closed in on the now-led trio, which became a duo when Lauda went out with an electrical failure. Villeneuve and Reutemann ran 1-2 with Jones putting both under pressure, before Villeneuve also retired after colliding with a back marker. Jones then suffered from fuel pressure problems and began to drop back, handing second to Andretti to the fans' delight. The rest of the race passed without incident, and with all challengers out of contention, Reutemann won comfortably ahead of Andretti and Di Pala. Race 5, Monaco Round 5 took place in Monaco, taking place after an extended gap created by the Japanese Grand Prix at the Fuji Speedway being cancelled. Once again Reutemann started on pole with the Brabham duo of Watson and Lauda second and third. Watson had a good start and led into the first corner, whereas Reutemann collided with Hunt and had to pit for repairs, which left Di Pala and Lauda second and third. For the first half of the race, the top three remained the same until Watson had enough, allowing Di Pala and Lauda through, but the latter then suffered a puncture and had to pit for tyres before charging back up and retaking second from Watson towards the end of the race. At the front, Di Pala took his first career victory with Lauda second, and Scheckter third after Watson made another mistake in the final laps. Race 6, Belgium The main news before the Belgian GP was that the new Lotus 79 is now ready to race, and immediately Andretti showed its pace by taking pole comfortably from Reutemann and Lauda. He converted it to a first corner lead, whereas Reutemann had a bad start and got swamped by the field, causing a chain reaction in which Lauda was hit by Scheckter and had to retire. This left Villeneuve second and Peterson third, but neither could keep pace with Andretti, who was able to drive away. The first 40 laps went without incident until Villeneuve suffered a puncture and had to pit, which dropped him back down to fifth, and a few laps later Peterson also pitted for new tyres, leaving the charging Reutemann second ahead of Jacques Laffite's Ligier. Peterson on the new tyres was much quicker and was able to pass them both in the closing stages, and Laffite made an attempt to pass Reutemann on the last lap, but they collided and Laffite was out. Andretti cruised to an untroubled victory, with Peterson making it a Lotus 1-2, and Reutemann completing the podium. Race 7, Spain The next race was in Spain as once again the new Lotus 79 demonstrated its speed, with Andretti on pole again with Peterson alongside, and Reutemann having to settle for the second row. It was Hunt who got a great start, and he led into the first corner from Andretti and Reutemann, with Peterson dropping all the way back to ninth. Hunt led for 7 laps before Andretti passed him and pulled away. Reutemann ran third until he had to pit for tyres, and so Watson inherited third until he was passed by Laffite, but soon the recovering Peterson passed both of them. Hunt now suffered from tyre problems and he also began to drop back, and so Peterson was able to take second and Laffite third. That was how it stayed to the end, Andretti winning from Peterson in another Lotus 1-2, and Laffite getting the final spot on the podium. Race 8, Sweden Before the Swedish GP, the Brabham team had developed a new-found car much to the indignation of the other teams, but the FIA allowed it to race. However, it did not stop Andretti from continuing his run of poles, but it was able to get Watson to qualify second and Lauda third. When the race started, Andretti led into the first corner, with Lauda getting second from his teammate. Riccardo Patrese got up to third in his arrows until he was passed by home driver Peterson, but by then Andretti and Lauda had escaped. Peterson began to struggle with a slow puncture, whereas Andretti and Lauda battled, with Andretti making a mistake just after mid-distance, allowing Lauda to take the lead. Lauda went on to win the race, his first for Brabham after Andretti's challenge ended due to an engine failure, which left Patrese and Peterson to take second and third. Race 9, France Brabham were forced to revert to their previous car again, but it did not deter them, with Watson on pole and Lauda starting third behind Andretti. At the start, Watson led into the first corner, with Andretti following, and Patrick Tambay putting his McLaren in third, but that order did not remain for long as Andretti took the lead from Watson in the first lap. Lauda and Peterson were on the move as well, as they passed Watson and Tambay to jump into second and third, but Lauda suffered another engine failure. This left the two Lotus cars running 1-2 and they finished like that with Andretti taking his third win in 4 races, and the podium was completed by Hunt who passed Watson mid-race. Race 10, Great Britain the field went to Britain for the next round, and this time it was Peterson who beat Andretti to pole, as Lotus took the front row, with Scheckter next up on the second row. Andretti took the lead at the start from Peterson, and the two Lotus cars quickly pulled out a gap until Peterson retired with an engine failure. Andretti had a big lead to Scheckter and continued to extend it until he had to pit with a puncture, and he eventually retired when his engine also failed. Scheckter inherited the lead, but Lauda put him under pressure and took the lead before Scheckter went out with gearbox problems. This put Reutemann up to second, and he then closed down and passed Lauda in the late stages of the race to win. Lauda had to settle for second, and his teammate Watson took a podium in his home race. Race 11, West Germany The West German race was next on the calendar, and there were no surprises in qualifying, with Andretti on pole and Peterson alongside him, with Lauda third. At the start, Peterson got off better and took the lead from Andretti, but he held it for only 4 laps before Andretti retook it. Lauda ran third in the early stages but he was passed by Alan Jones, and the duo battled until Lauda's engine failed yet again. The two Lotus cars were cruising at the front and Jones ran third comfortably until he retired with a fuel vaporization problem. Lotus's hopes of a 1-2 ended when Peterson's gearbox failed, but Andretti was unaffected by that and cruised to his 5th win of the season, with Scheckter second and Lafayette third. Race 12, Austria The crowds for the Austrian GP were full of Lauda fans. But however for them Lauda qualified only 12th as the Lotus cars again took the front row, with Peterson on pole. The surprise in qualifying was Jean-Pierre Jabouille who qualified his turbocharged Renault third. The start saw Peterson lead into the first corner, with Reutemann snatching second from Andretti. Andretti tried to get the place back later in the lap, but the two collided and Andretti retired after his car spun into the barriers while Reutemann lost a couple of places to Patrick Depailler and Scheckter. On the 4th lap, a heavy rain shower hit the track and Reutemann spun off and was beached but the marshal's push started his car as it was in a dangerous position, while Scheckter crashed out, and the race was stopped. The race restarted after the rain relented, and once again Peterson led followed by Depailler and Lauda. As the track began to dry, Peterson started to pull away, and behind, Reutemann was on a charge and passed Lauda for third but he was black flagged for receiving outside assistance, and Lauda crashed out soon after, leaving Gilles Villeneuve third. The drivers changed to slicks but the top 3 remained the same and stayed so till the end. Peterson winning ahead of Depailler, with Villeneuve taking his first ever podium. Race 13, Holland The drivers went to the Netherlands for the next race, and qualifying was as expected, Andretti taking pole with Peterson alongside in the all-Lotus front row, and Lauda heading the second row. At the start, Andretti led with Peterson following, whereas Lauda was challenged by Jacques Lafayette. The Lotus cars quickly built up a good gap, while Lafayette challenged Lauda early on but then began to drop down the order with tyre issues. The race was quite uneventful, and Andretti went to take victory, with Peterson completing another Lotus 1-2 leaving Lauda to take third. Race 14, Italy The Italian race was host to round 14, and as usual Andretti took pole with Gilles Villeneuve pleasing the Ferrari fans by qualifying second, ahead of Jabouille's turbocharged Renault. When the race started, Andretti and Villeneuve got away comfortably with Lauda and Jabouille following, but the rest of the field was bunched up. Riccardo Patrese Arrows was pushed to the grass, and as he rejoined, James Hunt veered left and hit Peterson, who spun off into the barriers, whereas up to 7 other cars were collected, including Reutemann, Depailler, and Clay Regazzoni. Peterson's car broke in two on impact with the barriers and caught fire, and Vittorio Brambilla, who was in the Surtees, was hit on the head by a flying wheel. Peterson and Brambilla were taken to hospital, the former with a broken leg, and there was concern for the latter, who was unconscious after being hit by the wheel. The rest of the drivers were uninjured, and most of them were able to take the restart. The race restarted almost 4 hours after the original start. Again there was confusion as the front row starters Andretti and Villeneuve went too early, but the rest of the field did not follow, and both Andretti and Villeneuve were handed 1-minute time penalties as a result. On the track, Villeneuve led ahead of Andretti and Jabouille, until Jabouille retired, handing third place on the track to Lauda. His teammate Watson battled with Reutemann and Laffite, and eventually was able to pull away. The battle on the track was between Villeneuve and Andretti, with the Lotus driver passing Villeneuve with 5 laps left. Andretti crossed the line first, with Villeneuve close behind, but when their 1-minute penalties were added, it was Lauda who emerged the victor ahead of Watson and Reutemann. In hospital, Peterson had a clot forming in his bloodstream after undergoing an operation on his legs, and slipped into a coma overnight, and died the next morning. This made Andretti the world champion, although he did not celebrate it, and mourned for Peterson along with his fellow drivers. Brambilla was able to recover from his injuries. Race 15, United States. The penultimate round of the season was in the US, and Lotus had hired Jean-Pierre Arias to replace Peterson, and Patrese was unable to race because the Grand Prix Drivers' Association had deemed him responsible for the accident which ultimately killed Peterson. New world champion and home hero Andretti was shaken up more than most drivers due to Peterson's death, but it did not stop him from romping to pole ahead of Reutemann, with Alan Jones's Williams heading the second row. Andretti kept the lead at the start, with Reutemann and Villeneuve following, ahead of Jones. Andretti, however, was suffering from an ill-handling car which also had brake troubles, and was soon passed by both Reutemann and Villeneuve, and later Jones. Reutemann and Villeneuve ran 1-2 for Ferrari, until Villeneuve's engine blew up. This left Jones second and Andretti third, but Andretti's engine blew up, handing third to Lauda until he too suffered the same fate, thus leaving Scheckter third before he was passed by a charging Arias. However, Arias ran out of fuel with 4 laps left, giving the place back to Scheckter. Reutemann took a comfortable win from Jones, with Scheckter completing the podium. Race 16, Canada. The season finished off in Canada, coming to the newer registered trademark Le Notre Dame circuits in Montreal. The Formula One circus left the previous Canadian GP location of Mosport Park due to safety issues with the Toronto circuit. In qualifying, it was Arias who starred, by qualifying on pole ahead of Scheckter and home hero Villeneuve. Arias was able to easily lead into the first corner, with Jones jumping up to second after a brilliant start, also dropping Scheckter down to third. As Arias began to pull away, Jones suffered a slow puncture, and dropped down the field as the race progressed, promoting Scheckter to second and Villeneuve to third, and then Villeneuve passed Scheckter mid-race to take second. Arias continued to dominate until he retired with an oil leak, leaving Villeneuve to take his first career win in his home race ahead of Scheckter, with Reutemann taking third. Results and standings. Grand Prix. Calendar changes. There was originally supposed to be a Japanese Grand Prix at the Fuji Speedway for this season scheduled for April 16, between Long Beach and Monaco, but it was cancelled for unknown reasons. World Drivers' Championship final standings. Drivers' Championship points were awarded on a 9, a Euro 6, a Euro 4, a Euro 3, a Euro 2, a Euro 1 basis to the top 6 finishes in each round. The best 7 results from the first 8 races and the best 7 results from the remaining 8 races were retained. International Cup for F1 Constructors. A Euro final standings. Constructors points were awarded on a 9, a Euro 6, a Euro 4, a Euro 3, a Euro 2, a Euro 1 basis to the top 6 place getters in each round, with only the best placed car from each constructor eligible to score points. The best 7 results from the first 8 races and the best 7 results from the remaining 8 races were retained. Official FIA results for the 1978 International Cup for F1 Constructors listed the positions as JPS-Lotus Ferrari Brabham Alfa Elf Tyrrell Wolf Ligier Matra Copa Sucar McLaren Williams and Arrows Shadow Renault Surtees and Insign. Non-championship race results equals. A single non-championship race for Formula One cars was held in 1978, the XXX BRDC International Trophy, staged at Silverstone. This was the last time that this event was run for Formula One cars. The race was won by future Formula One world champion Keke Rosberg, driving in only his second Formula One event. References. External links: 1978 World Championship race classifications and images at f1-facts.com, video F1 season 1978 and driver portraits.